Archbishop John Williams was a powerful man who was admired by many and hated by quite a few. For years he was loyal to his cause, but later called a traitor. He became rich and then lost it all. There haven't been many archbishops quite like him.
So what is the story of John Williams, the Archbishop of York, or John York as he was known in Wales?
Born in 1582 in Conwy, Williams came from moderately well-to-do families. After Ruthin Grammar School, he went to St John's College, Cambridge. Coming from a Welsh-speaking background, it was said that on his arrival he spoke better Greek than English.
He gained a master's degree, qualified for the clergy, and later obtained a doctorate of divinity. And then came an appointment that was to change his life.
He became confidential secretary to Lord Ellesmere, the Lord Chancellor. Ellesmere became his mentor, encouraging him to study law, and opened for him a door to the top level of government. In 1609, King James I heard one of William's sermons and was impressed, so much so that within a few years he became the king's personal chaplain and advisor. It seems that the two were also friends. High-profile appointments followed: Dean of Westminster, Bishop of Lincoln, and then the very prestigious Lord Chancellor, the keeper of the Great Seal of England, the impression that proved the validity of a document from the monarch.
His income from the positions he held, plus from his estates and several generous legacies, gradually made him a rich man, and he was generous with his money, supporting a variety of philanthropic causes.
When an alliance with Spain seemed a possibility through a planned marriage between James's son Prince Charles and Princess Anna Maria, he learned the language to reasonable fluency in 10 weeks. He spoke 9 languages in all. When King James died in 1625, Williams was there and closed James's eyes. His son, Prince Charles, now Charles I, hadn't gone on well with Williams. Charles's then favourite, the headstrong but influential Duke of Buckingham, worked to undermine the bishop's authority. And so John Williams was duly sacked as Lord Chancellor, forbidden to take his seat in the House of Lords, and kept away from Charles's coronation. The new king's advisers included William Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Thomas Wentworth, the Earl of Strafford. Both were to become bitter enemies of John Williams, and eventually both met a violent end.
There were deep divisions within the church at this time. Some, like Williams, were tolerant of austere Puritanism and to some extent Catholicism. Others, like Archbishop Laud, were not. This was a time of high tension, and in 1628 Charles decided to dissolve Parliament and rule alone. John Williams thought this a very dangerous development.
He wrote that it presaged the ruin of the state, for to rule without Parliament was to fall out with the whole nation.
In 1636, the Archbishop's enemies got him accused of revealing state secrets. This was almost certainly a trumped-up charge.
But in defending himself in the Star Chamber, he was found guilty of persuading a witness to commit perjury. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London for 4 years. On release, he was allowed to take his seat in the House of Lords. As the rift between King and Parliament grew wider, King Charles evidently lost faith in Laud and Strafford. When Parliament sat again, after 11 years, it called for their impeachment and trial on grounds of treason. In a strange twist, Williams was now in favour with King Charles. Strafford was found guilty and sentenced to death, with Williams's connivance, and he later urged the king not to spare Strafford's life. Laud was also beheaded a few years later.
John Williams's closeness to the king made him suspect to Parliament, and before long he found himself in the Tower of London once again, albeit briefly. Upon release on bail, he sped north to join King Charles at York, and there he was enthroned as the Archbishop of York.
On the 22nd of August 1642, war erupted between the king and Parliament. Soon after, Williams headed back to North Wales and his hometown of Conwy. The town's great castle, built by King Edward I, had fallen into decay. The Archbishop set about repairing and strengthening the castle and town walls. It was a very expensive task, and he paid for it all. It appears that John Williams, with all this huge expense, considered himself in charge of Conwy, and he had been assured that the castle should remain in his hands until his costs had been repaid. So he was outraged when Prince Rupert gave the role of governor to Sir John Owen of Llanelli. To make matters worse, Sir John took possession of the castle forcibly, his men breaking locks and doors to seize property that the Archbishop considered was his. The two men didn't get on at all well after that, and Williams made his feelings clear about Sir John. He wrote that he was one of the sharks and children of fortune, who know not how to subsist but by licence and imposture.
John Williams wrote to the king asking to be put in charge of the town and castle. But eventually, after a delay, Sir John's position as governor was renewed, and to make things worse for Williams, he was made High Sheriff of the county. It could be argued that John Williams was more loyal to the king than the king had been to him.
Royalists had been defeated in major battles, including Naseby and Marston Moor. Chester fell to Parliament, and the way was open into North Wales.
It was now obvious to Williams that the war was lost. His thoughts moved towards avoiding unnecessary death and destruction in his native Conwy and Wales. In a letter he wrote,
"What they will say in the end of the day I do not know, nor do I care. If I could, with mine own sacrificing, keep this poor country from being ruined."
That view made many royalists see him as a turncoat.
That was reinforced when he evidently liaised with parliamentary soldier Colonel Thomas Mytton. Williams asked Mytton to ensure that all property at Conwy should be returned to its rightful owners, including, presumably, his own. With advice from the Archbishop, Mytton stormed the town on the 18th of August 1646. The attackers found that their 11-yard-long ladders were a yard and a half too short, but with a struggle they got over the walls. It was claimed that the 64-year-old Williams actually fought with the Roundheads and was wounded, but that seems very unlikely. The town was not sacked, but Irish Catholic prisoners were murdered in cold blood by being bound together and thrown into the sea to drown. It was cynically said that they had been sent by water to their own country. Sir John Owen held the castle for another 3 months before surrendering. He was eventually allowed to go home. His musketeers were given 10 shillings each, and they dispersed.
After this, there were those who regarded John Williams as a traitor. The great and loyal royalist had become a Roundhead, no matter that in reality he was just facing up to the inevitable. With the help of Mytton, he obtained a pardon and also retained some of his estates, but most of his fortune had gone. In fact, it was said that he was in debt. He did, however, receive a letter from the parliamentary leader, signed "Your cousin, and servant Oliver Cromwell. However, hostile public opinion meant that Williams, who was by now an ex-archbishop, kept a relatively low profile. He was, though, somewhat active behind the scenes, influencing local matters.
John Williams died of quinsy while staying at Gwydir Castle on the 25th of March 1650, his 68th birthday.
So what have historians made of a man who was fairly described as the most eminent Welshman of his time? Opinions are mixed.
The historian Thomas Carlyle called him Hasty Hot Welsh Williams. The Earl of Clarendon, a contemporary of Williams who wrote a history of the Civil Wars, thought that Williams was, quite simply, odious, and the historian Samuel Rawson Gardner argued that if Charles had listened to the moderate Williams instead of the inflexible Archbishop Laud, there may not have been a civil war at all. There exists a memorial to this important man of his time. It is in the small church of St. Tegai in the village of Llandagai. Some said it is a rather modest memorial for such a great man, but its Latin text concludes with the lines, "Nor does it matter that so small a memorial, hidden in this obscure corner, should preserve the memory of a man so great that all time will keep his virtues famous."